Hello everyone! So today we're going to be doing a hopefully pretty quick tutorial on the difference between absolute and relative positioning. We're also going to talk a little bit about fixed positioning as well as the different unit types, so like EM, PX, VH, BW, REM, that sort of stuff. I got a request to make a video explaining positioning. This honestly is still something that I don't fully understand, and I'm pretty far along in my HTML CSS journey. So hopefully this video will help make it a bit more clear. I do think it can be a bit tricky to wrap your head around, but once you understand the basics of it, it's really not as daunting as it seems. Um, but yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and get started. I have went ahead and created just like a blank Neocity site, and all I've really done is I've added red, green, and blue boxes with a set width and height, and then just different color borders to differentiate between them. And then I've added them in HTML down below, some very basic stuff. And you can see this is the default positioning. This is what is called static positioning. So just how elements are positioned when you don't add any positioning to them. So you can see based in the order that I added them in the HTML, it's just stacked on top of each other, red, then green, then blue, no space in between them, not, pushed up exactly against the page. There's a little bit of padding, but this is how it looks like. And so to begin quickly, the difference between relative and absolute positioning, as I think this is probably the most confusing. And again, I explain it to myself and it still doesn't make perfect sense to me. I have to constantly remind myself which one should I be using? But I do think that's normal, and anyways, so I've written some notes for myself so I don't forget. But relative positioning, so we're going to start by adding relative positioning to the red box so we can see what it does. So I'm just going to say position relative, and I'm just going to push it over to the right a little bit. So I'm just going to say left 50 px, and again we'll get into the difference between px, em, that sort of thing a little bit later on. So you can see that when I do that, the red box is pushed to the right a little bit, and the green and blue box are not affected. So relative positioning, the notes I've made here, it moves the box from where it originally was, and it keeps the original space on the website. This is, I think, the most important part. This space here, the box, still keeps this space. You can see the green and the blue box have not been pushed up to take this space. That is now empty. It keeps its original space. It's just being moved from where it originally was. And again, the most important thing, it does not impact other elements. This is different from absolute positioning. We can see that if I were to change this to absolute and keep, the left 50px the same, and we refresh it, we can see that now the green box and blue box have both moved up to take the empty space that the red box has left. Because absolute positioning will impact other elements, it leaves, the little static column we had going here, it leaves the flow of that. It is now kind of an independent element floating along on its own. And so absolute positioning, it's going to be positioned. I'm saying relative, which is confusing because it's not relative positioning. I have here positioned relative to the nearest positioned parent. So I think that when do I use relative positioning and when do I use absolute positioning? I have a little blurb about that at the bottom. But absolute positioning is good for things inside of relative positioned things, if that makes sense. So for example, I would use relative positioning to position this red box, and then anything that I want inside that red box, I would use absolute positioning for. Anything that is absolutely positioning inside the red box is going to be positioned based on the relative positioning of that red box. Does that make sense? I feel like I just kind of threw word soup a little bit, but I'm going to try to demonstrate that with an image. So we are going to go back to having relative positioning for the red box, and I'm going to go ahead and add in an image inside the red box. So this is just an image I downloaded earlier when I was like figuring out what I wanted to say in this tutorial. So I'm just quickly going to add this, and I have added a class up here. This should actually be absolute positioning. Okay, so you can see that we have relatively positioned our red box here. It's pushed over to the right. The green and the blue box have not been affected. And now I have the image inside of this box, and it is now pushed down. And I think that this is really helpful because I could move the red box anywhere. So like, I'll just move it even further to the right, getting real crazy. And the image will move with it, and the image does not change its position inside of the red box. And I think a common mistake I faced is like, why wouldn't you just absolutely position everything on your site? Because that seems easy. But the problem comes where you saw how when I absolutely positioned the red box, the green and the blue box changed. Now imagine if they were all absolutely positioned. It becomes an issue because if everything is absolutely positioned, when you want to change the position of one small thing, that is then going to affect the position of everything else on your site. And that is not what we want. So like, for example, with this red box here, if I wanted to change, if like, let's say I had 2 images inside the red box and I wanted to change the position of just that one image, I would only have to work on the positioning of the things inside the red box that has been relatively positioned rather than having to edit, things inside the green box, things inside the blue box. I think it's really important to kind of see absolute positioning as child and relative positioning as parent. Absolute positioning depends on the position of the element that is relatively positioned. I think that's the most important point. I'm saying it and it sounds very confusing, but I hope that it makes sense. So yeah, I would recommend absolute positioning for things like images, buttons, things you want, smaller kind of decorative things you want inside, more bigger like boxes and borders, and things like that. So really quickly, I'm going to make a note about fixed positioning. This is not something I really use a lot, but I do see it on some people's sites, and I think it's worth mentioning. It's actually a lot simpler than absolute and relative positioning. It is fixed positioning. The element will stay, it's in one place and will not scroll with the page. So this could be useful if you want like an image that the user always sees, or like a music player. So for example, I'm just going to take this same image, and I am going to remove the class, and I'm just going to add fixed positioning. So you can see it's kind of like overlapping the box here, but that's okay. And you can see I'm like scrolling on my site. See how the image is not moving, but everything else is. My site's like not big enough to actually scroll, but like I think you get the gist of it. I just wanted to point that out in case it's like, oh, like what about fixed positioning? It's just a small note. And now moving on to the units, you can see I have been using PX. This is like, I guess, the highly recommended unit. This is kind of just the standard unit. I wrote good for small decorations. I think it's good. Like I said, things like padding, border sizes, margin, images, just like little things you want to tweak. PX is a fixed size. It is not going to change. So like, even if I were to change the width and the height of the red box, the size of the image is not going to change because it is a PX size, if that makes sense. It's kind of the complete opposite of percent, which is sized relative to the parent. So I think the easiest way to explain this is our image inside the red box. If I were to instead say 100, instead of 100 PX, 100%, we can see that it is now going to take up the entire, it's not like a tall enough image, but width-wise, it is going to take up the entire width of the red box, I'm just going to remove this because it's a bit distracting. And then like if I were to say 25%, it's going to take up 1/4 of the width of the red box. And this is nice because even if I were to make the red box like twice as big, I won't have to change the image size because it is still 1/4 of the image size. So I think percent is useful for if, you know, you change the size of a container and you want the elements inside that container to change with the container. Does that make sense? I hope that that makes sense. Like if you're using percent on an image, it will change automatically when you change the size of the container. You won't have to go in and change the image size to match the container that you've now just made bigger or smaller. But if you were to use PX, it is the opposite. It is fixed and you would have to go in and change it. So even if you made the container bigger or smaller, PX is fixed. The size of the image, or again, whatever element, will stay the same. Something a bit easier to understand, VW and VH. This is also something I don't use as frequently, but I think it's worth mentioning. And like I said, it's very easy to understand in my opinion. So like 100 VH is just going to be the entire height of your screen. So like if you have like a divider that you want to span across the entire width of your page, you would use 100 VW. And you're using this because not everybody's computer size is the same, but it's just saying that no matter like how big or small someone's screen is that they're looking at your website on, that divider will span across the entire width of that person's screen. And like pretty straightforward, 25 VH would be 1/4 of the screen, 50 VH would be half of like the vertical screen. So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I don't use it as much, but it's pretty straightforward. And then lastly, EM and REM. This is again a bit harder to understand. I had to like go over how I'm going to explain it like 12 times because it still confuses me a bit. So I have, again, that we're going to try to show this with an example. So I'm just going to quickly change this back to normal. So REM, for example, the like default HTML text size, I believe is 16px. So saying one REM is just 16px. You can see like this is like the standard text size. And then if I were to say 2 REM, that is going to be 16 times 2, 32px. So it is just going to multiply by the, you know, the 16px number, the like standard basic HTML text size. And so the difference with that versus EM is kind of similar to percent, and the way that, so like let's say I have for this red container 1.5 EM, and then I go and I make the font size 1.5 EM, save it, refresh. We can see that somehow it is now bigger than when we had it at 2 REM, and that is because the EM is relative to the parent text size. So this is already bigger than 1, and then this is relative to this, so it is going to be even bigger than when we had the 2 REM times the default 16px equaling the 32px size. So EM I think is useful for, like I said, again, if I were to want to change the font size of all the text in this red container without having to go in and individually changing all of the font sizes, I would use EM, because the bigger I make this, if I make this 2 EM, even if I don't change the font size here, it will get bigger. Whereas if I were using REM and I were to change the font size here, it would not do anything because REM does not pay any attention to what is being set in the red container. With EM, it just goes to that, you know, default 16px thing. So that's useful for like if I wanted to make the red container bigger, but I wanted the text to say just as small, say I'm like only making the container bigger to make room for something else and I don't want the text to expand, that's when I would use REM. I hope that that makes sense. It is so hard to wrap my head around that. I've had to film it a few times, and I still don't think I use best practices sometimes when it comes to like positioning and what units to use. I definitely learned a lot making this tutorial, so shout out to the person who recommended it. I definitely still don't know everything, but I hope this was able to give you a little bit of an idea at least of like positioning and units and that sort of stuff. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate all the support. Any more video ideas would be lovely in the comments down below. Let me know if you have any questions, critiques, concerns. All my socials are linked down below. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate the support. I will see you guys in the next tutorial, and I'm already forgetting to mention that I'll leave this kind of messy, my brain dump Google Doc in the description if anyone wants to refer back to it, as well as this awesome resource. I've read through this a few times while trying to like formulate my thoughts for this video. I love, love, love this website, and I think it explains it in a much more professional way than I have explained it. So yeah, you can go ahead and give that a read through if you would like.